Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at
Oh, yeah.
something really interesting, I think, and it's this idea of a burnout society.
Okay.
And we're going to be taking a look at excerpts from this book called
Interesting.
The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul.
Oh,
It was originally written in German,
wow.
and it kind of leads you to think about,
Interesting.
we're constantly being told, yes, we can, but
Right.
is there a hidden cost
Yeah,
to all of that
I see.
striving?
Yeah, it's fascinating how Han connects this idea to what he calls our,
Right.
like defining illnesses.
Yeah.
He says that like the 20th century was all about immunology.
Okay.
We were obsessed with like fighting off external threats,
All right.
whether it was like viruses or on a larger scale,
Yeah.
even ideologies during like the Cold War.
Right.
Does that ring a bell at all for you?
Totally.
Do you feel like you're still battling those kinds of external forces
Absolutely.
in your life?
Yeah, it's like we were living in this world of boundaries.
Yeah.
Like always on guard.
Mm-hmm.
But then Hans says that the 21st century is completely different.
I see.
And now it's all about neuronal disorders.
Interesting.
Depression, anxiety, this feeling of total burnout.
Right.
And get this.
Yeah.
He says that it's not from a lack of something, but from an excess of positivity.
Interesting.
Too much work pressure to achieve constant stimulation.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're drowning in opportunity.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
This actually connects back to the idea of the disciplinary society
Okay.
that philosopher Michel Foucault talked about.
Okay.
He described a world with very clear rules and restrictions,
Yeah.
like factories and prisons.
Right.
It was all about being told no.
So in a way, those restrictions provided some kind of structure,
That's
even if it was limiting.
Exactly.
Right.
But now we've shifted to what Han calls the achievement society, where it's all about pushing ourselves to do more, be more.
Right.
It sounds great on the surface,
Yeah.
but it leads to this new kind of pressure, self-exploitation.
No, wow.
We become both the prisoner and the guard in the prison of our own minds.
Now, this is where it gets really unsettling.
Okay.
Han makes this bold comparison between Muslim prisoners in concentration camps,
Right.
those who had given up all hope,
Yeah.
and people suffering from burnout today.
I see.
He points out that they actually share some similar symptoms.
Wow.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
Yeah. This is
Like we're all becoming Muslims in
Yeah.
a different kind of camp,
Mhm.
the camp of relentless self-improvement.
It's definitely a provocative observation.
Yeah,
We have to be careful not to oversimplify things, of course,
sure,
but it does make you think.
for sure.
Are there any parallels to your own experience?
Yeah.
Are you feeling that pressure to constantly perform,
Absolutely.
to optimize every aspect of your life?
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not just impacting our mental health.
Right.
It's changing how we think.
I see.
Han argues that we're developing a kind of attention deficit disorder,
Okay.
but not in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
He compares us to animals in the wild,
Interesting.
always multitasking to survive.
Yeah.
Think of a gazelle,
Okay.
constantly scanning for predators,
Right.
keeping an eye on its young,
Mm-hmm.
all while trying to find food.
Yeah. It's true. In the wild, you can't afford to get lost in deep thought.
Right.
You need to be alert to every stimulus.
And Han's point is that we're becoming like those gazelles,
Okay.
hyper attentive to everything, and never able to dive deep into anything.
Mm-hmm.
And this impacts our creativity, our ability to generate truly new ideas.
Okay.
Remember what Walter Benjamin said?
Oh, yeah.
That boredom is the dream bird that hatches the egg of experience?
It's a great quote.
Are we too busy now to even let those eggs hatch?
What's interesting is that
Yeah.
Han actually critiques Hannah Arendt, a political philosopher who wrote The Human Condition
I say.
back in the mid-20th century.
Okay.
Her big worry was that modern humans were becoming passive worker bees.
Right.
She championed action and engagement with the world.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
It's kind of ironic because
Yeah.
now it seems like the problem isn't passivity, it's too much activity.
It's totally flipped.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a great example of how intellectual ideas need to be constantly revisited and reinterpreted.
For sure.
What was a concern back then
Right.
might be completely flipped
Totally.
in our current reality.
So if the problem isn't a lack of action, what does Han propose as a solution?
Well, here's the counterintuitive part.
Okay.
Han says that to be truly active,
I see.
we need the ability to not do things,
Interesting.
the power to say no.
So like instead of constantly reacting to every demand, every notification, every opportunity, We need to choose what to focus on.
And that's where he brings in the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche,
Okay.
another philosopher.
I see.
Nietzsche talked about learning to see,
Okay.
to choose what to pay attention to cultivate
Right.
a discerning eye.
This is huge for everyone listening.
I know.
Think about it.
I know.
In a world screaming for your attention,
Yeah,
how do you develop that not to muscle?
it's hard.
How do you carve out space for contemplation and
Yeah.
depth in this crazy, fast-paced world?
And that's where Hahn turns to literature
Oh,
for a fascinating example.
okay.
He uses Herman Melville's short story, Bartleby the Scrivener,
I
as
see.
a kind of case study.
Oh, yeah. Bartleby,
Right.
the guy who famously says, I would prefer not to.
Exactly.
But wasn't he seen as some kind of mystical figure?
Well, Hahn has a different interpretation.
Interesting.
He sees Bartleby as someone completely overwhelmed
Okay.
by the demands of modern work, even back then.
Yeah.
Remember all that imagery of dead walls in the story?
Oh, yeah.
It reflects the soul-crushing nature
Yeah.
of Bartleby's workplace.
I never thought about it that way.
So is Hahn saying that Bartleby was like an early case of burnout?
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
That's exactly his point.
Interesting.
And while Bartleby might seem like an extreme example,
Right.
Hahn argues that his struggle reflects a deeper truth
Okay.
about the human condition in a world dominated by work and achievement.
So even back in the 19th century,
It seems so.
people were already feeling the pressure.
And if that was true, then
Mhm.
imagine how much more intense it is now
Right.
with our 24/7 work culture
For sure.
and constant digital distractions.
Yeah. It's a lot to think about.
Right.
But it also feels like there's a glimmer of hope here.
Absolutely.
If we can understand the forces that are leading to burnout,
Yeah.
maybe we can start to find ways to resist them.
And that's what we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. I can't wait.
We'll look at what Hahn proposes as potential solutions, or at least ways to start pushing back against this burnout culture.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
I am too.
It's interesting to think about how much our culture values like productivity and busyness.
Yeah.
It's almost like tiredness has become
Right.
a bad word.
That's a great point. And Hahn actually challenges that assumption
Okay.
by introducing this idea of fundamental tiredness
Okay.
from the writer Peter Hanke.
I'll admit the idea of good tiredness seems kind of counterintuitive to me.
Yeah.
I always feel guilty
Right.
if I'm not being like productive.
Sure.
Help me understand, how can tiredness actually be a
Yes.
positive thing?
Well, Hanke describes fundamental tiredness as something very different
Okay.
from the exhaustion of burnout.
I see.
It's not about depletion. It's about letting go.
Okay.
It allows us to step outside of our
Mhm.
ego-driven striving and experience a sense of peace
Yeah.
and belonging.
So it's more about surrendering to something
Exactly.
bigger than ourselves?
Yeah. It's a tiredness that can connect us to the world around us,
Okay.
to other people, even to something beyond ourselves.
Okay. I'm starting to get the idea, but it's still a bit abstract.
Right.
Does Hanke offer any concrete examples of what this
He does.
fundamental tiredness looks like?
One example he uses is the tiredness of a child at play.
Okay.
Think about it. Kids can run around for hours and then they just
Yeah.
collapse, completely spent,
Yeah.
but totally content.
I see.
They lose their self-consciousness and they just become
Right.
absorbed in the moment.
That's such a vivid image, and it's so true as adults. We often
Right.
lose that ability to fully immerse ourselves in
Yeah.
something and just be.
And Hanke suggests that we can recapture that sense of peace and openness
Okay.
through fundamental tiredness.
I see.
It's about accessing a different way of being in the world.
But how do we actually get there? I mean, most of us are stuck in
Yeah.
that cycle of burnout, feeling constantly exhausted and
Yeah.
overwhelmed. How do we shift from that kind of tiredness to this more
It's a good question.
positive state?
Hanke doesn't offer a quick fix.
Okay.
He says it requires cultivating a new way of being
Right.
in the world,
Mm-hmm.
slowing down, paying attention,
Yeah.
and resisting that urge to constantly
Yeah.
strive and achieve.
It sounds like this goes back to Han's idea of the
Yeah.
power of not to,
Uh-huh.
choosing to disengage from the demands of the
Yeah.
achievement society.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our worth isn't tied to our productivity.
Right.
And that there's value in simply being and resting in experiencing the world
Mm-hmm.
without trying to conquer it.
So in a way, this fundamental tiredness is a form of resistance.
Yes, it's about resisting the dominant narrative that tells us we're only valuable
I see.
if we're constantly producing and achieving.
You know, when I think about the people I truly admire,
Yeah.
they often embody this kind of tiredness.
Interesting.
They have a sense of peace and presence that's magnetic.
And that peace often comes from accepting their limitations.
I see.
They're not afraid to say no to rest,
Mm-hmm.
to let go of the need to control everything.
That's such a powerful message, especially in a world that tells us to do more,
Yeah.
be more, achieve more.
Mm.
It's liberating to think that it's okay to simply be.
And in that being, we might discover a deeper sense of connection,
Right.
creativity, and even joy.
It's interesting thinking back to the beginning of our dive,
Yeah.
how Han talked about the 20th century being defined by immunology,
Right.
that constant battle against external threats.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like that's shifted now.
You're right. It's almost like the battle of the 21st century is
Yeah.
an internal one.
Like the real fight is against this internal pressure, this relentless drive to achieve that
Okay.
leads to so much burnout.
And maybe, just maybe, the antidote to that pressure is this fundamental tiredness
Right.
that Hanke talks about. This willingness to surrender, to let go, to embrace
Yeah.
a different way of being in the world.
It definitely gives me a lot to think about.
Me too.
So where do we go from here? We've explored these two very different visions of tiredness, the burnout of the achievement society,
Uh-huh.
and Hanke's fundamental tiredness as a pathway to peace.
Remember, though, Han's book isn't just about diagnosing the problem.
Okay.
It's about challenging us to imagine a different future.
So what does that future look like, according to Han?
Yeah.
Does he offer any solutions, any paths forward?
He does, and they might surprise you.
Okay.
Let's explore those in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem, this burnout epidemic, this
Right.
pressure cooker of the achievement society.
Uh-huh.
But what does Han actually suggest we do about it?
Well, he doesn't offer a simple step-by-step guide,
Right.
but he does suggest some pretty radical shifts in our thinking.
Oh,
Remember how we talked about the doping society?
yeah, where we're just slapping on a Band-Aid
Exactly.
instead of actually healing the wound.
It's a quick fix instead of addressing those root causes
Right.
of burnout.
So what's the alternative?
Yeah.
What does Han propose?
He points to a few key ideas,
Okay.
and one that really stands out is this concept of vida contemplativa,
Okay.
the contemplative life.
Oh, I see.
This idea goes all the way back to ancient philosophy.
Okay.
But Han argues it's more relevant than ever in our burnout age.
But isn't that a bit passive? I mean, didn't Hannah Arendt warn us about
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
becoming too contemplative, too withdrawn from the world?
Han's point is that true contemplation isn't about escaping reality.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a deeper way of seeing the world.
I see.
It requires stillness, a willingness to let go of that striving and to simply observe.
So it's more like an active form of stillness.
Yeah.
Almost like meditation.
Yeah, there are definitely parallels to meditation.
Okay.
And Han emphasizes that this contemplative attitude
Mm-hmm.
is essential for creativity.
I see.
He argues that we need space for boredom for those moments
Right.
of quiet reflection where new ideas can actually emerge.
That's so hard in our world of constant stimulation, though, right?
Right.
We're bombarded with information notifications,
Right.
things to do.
Right.
It feels like there's never a moment to just be.
And that's why Han emphasizes the importance of what he calls not to.
Okay.
That ability to say no to the demands of the world,
Right.
to disconnect from the constant stream of information and stimulation.
It sounds like we need to build up our not to muscles.
You got it.
But how do we even start?
It takes practice, just like building any muscle.
Okay.
Han suggests things like meditation,
Okay.
contemplation, even just spending time in nature.
Yeah.
Anything that allows us to step away
Uh-huh.
from the constant doing and simply be present.
So it's not just about changing our minds.
Right.
It's about changing our habits, our entire way of life.
Exactly. And Han even suggests we need to rethink
Okay.
our relationship with work.
Okay.
He points to the Sabbath,
Uh-huh.
a day of rest that's built into many religious traditions.
Right.
He sees this as a model for how we might incorporate more not to
Okay.
into our
I
lives,
see.
regardless of our spiritual beliefs.
So giving ourselves permission to simply be
Exactly.
without feeling guilty about it.
And Han argues that this kind of rest isn't just good for us individually.
Right.
It's essential for a healthy society as a whole.
So if we can embrace not to cultivate a more contemplative attitude
Yeah.
and rethink our relationship with work and rest,
It's a tall order.
are you saying we might actually create a society
That's the hope.
that's less prone to burnout?
Right.
A world where people can actually flourish?
That's the vision.
It's a bold vision, and it certainly won't be easy.
He won't.
But I think it's a vision worth striving for.
I think so too.
It's a powerful reminder that we have a choice.
Yes.
We don't have to succumb to the burnout society.
Yeah.
We can choose a different path, one that leads to greater peace, connection, and well-being.
Absolutely.
For ourselves and for the world around us.
And that's the ultimate takeaway from our deep dive into the burnout society.
Yeah.
It's a call to action, an invitation to imagine a different future.
Yeah, I love that.
And to start taking steps, however small, to make that future a reality.
This has been an incredible journey.
It really has.
Thanks for guiding us through this complex and challenging topic.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
What resonated with you most?
Let us know.
What steps will you take to cultivate more not to in your own life?
Good question.
Share your reflections, and let's continue this conversation.
I'm excited to hear.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, and we'll see you next time.